Gangi. Welcome to another episode of On the Line. Great topic of discussion. Dealing with those non-compliant inmates, those problematic inmates. So what we're going to do is we're going to give out some advice, tell you what are the best approaches that we feel would work when dealing with the inmate who's being non-compliant. Now, guys, we're just talking about inmates that kind of challenge the orders that were given. Kind of like on the borderline of whether they could be charged or not. They're just constantly pushing our buttons. And I think it's going to be a great dialogue. The dialogue was suggested by none other, guys, wait for this, because she's here. Her name is Connie Alleyne.
Oh, God, cut it out.
What's up, Connie?
Hi, everybody. Connie Alleyne here. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy and the author of The Cage with Sir Cocoon. This actually came to me as a question as a civilian. You know, how do you deal with, you know, you don't have the authority as a civilian, the same authority as an officer does. So how do you deal with an inmate who's confrontational? And really a lot of times it goes against the therapeutic process. Like you want to like lean in and do all these things that I think is part of the therapeutic process, but we can't do that when you're dealing with these kind of inmates. So I look forward to us talking about it.
Connie, that's a curveball just now. You just threw us a curveball because now we have to do the civilian side. You're right, because our approach, me and Gary, were going right into custody mode. But yeah, we're going to have to see where this conversation goes because possibly a different approach for a civilian, as you said, because of the limitations. But let's see where it goes. And just mention who else we have on the show. Author of Corruption Behind Bars and Inside the Inner Circle, coming live to you right now, Gary York.
Hello, Anthony. Hello, Connie. Thanks for having me on the show. It's a very good topic, Connie, and a very important topic. So I think it'll be very interesting.
Yeah, she surprised us with a little because now I'm trying to think now because I was so focused on some ideas that I would easily, obviously, give to custody, which we'll still do, guys. But now we have another approach because I do believe that civilians could be rather limited in their approach of how to deal with it. But I'll start first with my tip, and then we'll keep it going around the table. I think this could apply to both custody and civilians or non-uniform staff is, first off, control your emotions. You ain't controlling any inmate unless you yourself are under control. So therefore, don't let the inmates push your buttons. You know, whatever you do, you have to remain in control. I remember, I could share a quick story about how control matters. Because believe it or not, guys, if you don't remain in control and you're highly emotional, your perspective limits. You know, it gets limited by the cloudiness of your emotions, and you don't see every possible solution because, again, you're too involved into your emotions. It's too myopic. So, give you a little story that I shared on my other channel a while back. But when I was new, and kind of just joining into this profession, there was an inmate that kept on challenging every order I gave her. By the way, she did the order. Wasn't that she didn't do it. She did the directives that I would do. Usually house cleaning directives, but she would always tend to mouth off. And for some reason, I took that as a challenge. Even though she's complying with the order, I kind of was young and I wanted that last word. And we would always have this back and forth. And there was a good senior officer that was watching me in the distance, watching this interaction. And then finally, when he called me in the office, he goes, "So how do you think that went between you and that individual?" I said, "It went well, because she's still doing what I told her to do, right?" And he goes, "Yeah, but how do you feel about that back and forth you had? It looks like for a moment you lost control." I said, "Well, I didn't like the fact that she was talking back and challenging the order." He goes, "But was she still doing it?" And he goes, "Yes." He goes, "I'm going to tell you something right now. Pull that inmate by herself, talk to her, let her know, what the issues are, what you expect, and you're probably going to get a whole different inmate, because the problem is, as you guys are going back and forth, and because right now you're highly emotional, you don't see that she's surrounded by people that are reinforcing her want to challenge you. So you don't have any control of the environment, you don't have any control of yourself, and there's no way you're going to control her. So next day, get the same unit, she does come in, and I do exactly what he says. I explain to her, like, "Hey, listen, what's going on with us? I'm giving you an order. What's with the mouthing off, whatever it is." I mean, she actually took like a breath out and she goes, "Gangi, I don't even want to be doing this either. It's just that you're calling me out in front of my peers who are expecting me to do something a little bit different. But if you notice, I still do the order, but I can't let you call me out like that. So again, I learned something great. Control yourself. You see more. Obviously, you see more. But taking the inmate aside, to me, had a lot of value. What's your thoughts on that, Connie, about controlling emotions, controlling your environment, controlling yourself?
So self-control, I think, is the first thing on the list. You have to maintain your own self-control, because what happens is that particular inmate will pull you out of your professional space, which is also where you have the most leverage and you have the most authority in that professional zone. But when they can pull you out of that professional zone, they're pulling you to their level. And for you to go back and forth with them really is showing how much control they have over the situation, as opposed to how much control you have over the situation. I think for me, the most important thing to do in these instances is to remember that the hostility usually has nothing to do with you. The hostility usually has something to do with something else that's going on. So in your situation that you mentioned, it's about what all the other inmates are going to think. This person has a reputation to uphold. They got a way that the other inmates or their peers, they see them a certain kind of way, and you're kind of like pushing them out of that zone. I mean, many times from a civilian perspective, when we meet with the inmates and they do have some level of hostility, it's usually because it has something to do with a family member. Someone didn't come up for a visit. Somebody didn't give them commissary. There was something external to this particular interaction. It's also usually they ask custody for something and custody wouldn't give it to them. And then they're asking the civilian to somehow intervene. And we know that that's not our role, right? And so when we refuse to intervene in any of those situations that they present, because from a medical perspective, I'm here for the medical issue. And I'm going to do my best to try to make sure we manage your issue and make sure that you're stable. From a mental health perspective, you know, if you're on meds, this is just the therapeutic process and we're engaging, and you may not like what I'm telling you you need to do in order to cope with the realities of being in prison, or to cope with the realities that your cellmate snores, like all these things that like come into us that really are not things we have control over. We try to just put them in their right buckets and sort of refocus or redirect the inmate. But a lot of times when they come in and they've got all this, like, I don't want to say anxiety, but all of this hostility, I guess I'd say, towards us, usually it doesn't have anything to do with us. So I would say to any civilian that self-control is paramount. And then also when you see that it's escalating, instead of you trying, like, so yes, there are ways that we could try to de-escalate, but you can also just end that encounter before it goes any further. That way you're not putting in yourself in a position where you're just not safe any longer.
Yeah, I agree. My reaction at the time, guys, obviously being a new boot was wrong. What I should have did is 100% what Connie said is I should have maintained some level of control and then called that inmate to my office immediately to discuss what the concern is, instead of trying to solve it out in the open, where obviously there's too much conflict going on, which includes what her peers expect, which is different than what I am expecting, and hence the conflict. Hey, Gary, just to compliment on what Connie was saying, what's your thoughts on controlling your emotions, controlling your environment? I mean, does that apply for both civilians and custody?
Well, for civilians and uniformed officers, listen, the inmates are either angry or they're acting angry because they want to get you angry and they want to see how you react. So there's sometimes two different ways they play the game. But either way, you cannot get angry with it. You cannot have anger versus anger, because when you get angry, you lose all your thought process, and it makes your decision making a little different. So what you need to do is step back a little further than your normal spacing to protect you, and also listen, because listening to the inmate and not saying anything for a few seconds sometimes helps that process to come out, all the things the inmate wants to say. And as they're speaking in the jail, between the pods, we had a hallway. We would ask the inmates to step out because we were always trained, let's get the inmates out of the pod as soon as possible when they get irate. Why? Because we isolate them and we have them, just us and them in the hallway now. We've already called for backup. Civilian folks, when you make your space a little further and you stay calm and you just listen to what they have to say, I hope you have either a radio to call for help, or I hope you have an emergency device where you can hit the button for help. But usually there should be some uniformed staff watching you anyway as you work somewhere, but it doesn't happen all the time, I know. And every situation is not that way. So you may be a civilian caught in a situation alone. So I hope you have an emergency communication that you can get out for backup. But getting the inmates out of the pod and in that hallway, we usually found out that they de-escalated pretty quick on their own, unless there was a mental health issue and violence was part of their thing. But we also had in that hallway a secure area where if they did continue to remain violent, we could move them into that secure area until we got help, backup and medical down to the pod. But the main thing is what Connie said and what Anthony said: stay calm and do not get angry, and keep that space as you're walking away.
Yeah, and I want to touch just on something that Gary also mentioned. Obviously, that's very important. Is if you're an officer, obviously you're going to have one-on-one interactions with inmates, but try to have that in the view of a camera, or if there's support staff that can see you. But if you're a civilian, I would recommend that if you're going to have that dialogue with the inmate, definitely be in the vicinity of a uniformed staff member. It's not a dialogue that you want to have by yourself with that inmate. You do want custody to know, where you're at anyway. So it's good for them to kind of be in the vicinity. Let the inmates know that custody can see and observe. That's the key. So you can still have that dialogue, but let the inmates know that custody's there in case anything goes sideways. Now, guys, I also want you to realize something too. Non-compliance is different than threatening. Someone can be non-compliant and coming towards you. That's a lot different than someone being non-compliant and walking away from you. One thing, if an inmate's being non-compliant and they're coming towards you, get out, call the code, do what you got to do, because at that point you have an inmate that's just being resisted. And I'm not going to sit there and wait for that inmate to get into my space to assault me. I'm going to call for my backup, because again, the inmate's not listening and now they're coming towards me. I'm not going to wait for them to connect. Now, for an inmate that's walking away, I wouldn't chase after them. Especially if you're a civilian, I wouldn't chase after them. Now, if there's an order that you need to get across as a custody member and you have an inmate that's being passively resisted and walking away, you got all the time in the world. Call your backup. Hey, Sarge, can I have you come here for a second? Maybe with the GA or two? And then when they come down, now you address the order with your people behind you, just to kind of reinforce your level of authority. I just want to make sure that when we have this discussion, we're not putting you in any harm's way. But Connie, what's your thought about, what I just said, especially with the inmate maybe passively walking away and a civilian thinking, let me go and follow up and reinforce what I need done?
Yeah, no, that's never a good idea, because it's almost like you're goading the inmate, right? Like there's a point where, I'm not saying that as a civilian, because we don't have all the, protections and such in place, that you should be passive. But what I'm saying is, if the situation, as Gary said, has already started to de-escalate on its own, allow it to die its own natural death. Because there's always another day if you need to follow up on something. Or you can always speak to custody and say, hey, listen, this is what I need to get done with this inmate. And then allow custody to come in and partner to get things done, as opposed to you trying to go at it alone and confront this inmate when you may not necessarily be prepared for the way the inmate will respond.
Right. And guys, listen, and we're using the word respond, not react. This isn't about pride. The inmate disrespected me, my authority is being jeopardized, and, be like Gangi was at the beginning and just go right at it back and forth. It's not about pride, because that's what messed me up at the very beginning when I mentioned the story. That was me chasing after my pride. That's really what it was, which got me nowhere. It really did. It got me nowhere. I was actually reacting as opposed to responding. You know, responding is more thoughtful, kind of, you know, understanding the layout and kind of planning a response. I mean, that's the key. Instead of just leading on that emotion and going tit for tat, which is very hard to do. I get that. It is. This is more of just stepping back and kind of having that observation and kind of really looking at everything. Because if you're not looking at everything, you're going to miss out on some very good practical solutions. But Gary, I'm sure you know, right? There's a difference between reacting and responding, correct?
Yes, and you know, we always use this word reactionary gap. We don't want the inmate to come into our reactionary gap. Well, if an inmate is disobeying orders and going off at the mouth, but leaving and going back to his cell, or if it's an open dorm, they're going back to their bunk, and you go after them because you're angry, they didn't follow your orders and didn't listen to you, you're actually stepping into their area now, and you follow them to their area, and they were retreating. And as Connie mentioned, you're going to get that inmate riled up once again, and they may feel backed in a corner, and then they may actually physically attack you. So you're absolutely right, Anthony. You do not want to chase somebody that's retreating out of pride or anger. Just back on out of there. They're not going anywhere. If it takes 20 minutes to get some people together, let it be so. They're not bothering anybody now. And on the other hand, if they do attack and they're violent, well, that's why we're trained for use of force, self-defense. That's what we have to do.
Yeah, and guys, we also have to be careful of when you respond or react as well, because again, we talked about this from responding and reacting. Responding is very strategic. Reacting is in the moment. You could be reacting at the wrong time. That doesn't only just put yourself at risk, but puts others at risk. You know, so you're not thinking it through, and you're chasing after this inmate, and next thing you know, you're running into a open yard, you know, or you're running into an open mess hall, and sometimes things could wait if it's non-emergent. Because I've noticed this too, guys. If I had to get an order across, and let's say an inmate gave me a bit of a hard time, but they're still complying with the order, but they're challenging it through their words or whatever it is, but they're still getting it done, I can wait it out. You know, I could always, when, you know, things are locked down, I can go back with my supervisor or whatever it is and pull the inmate out and have that discussion. You know, it doesn't have to be in the moment. Now, if it's emergent, it's different. You know, if it's emergent, it's different. Obviously, you got to get that directive across, and you're expecting the reaction from the inmate. And there are certain points where you're not going to allow them to disrespect that order. There is a level of zero tolerance when you're going through an emergency situation. But again, sometimes it may not be emergent. And then what happens is we wind up chasing after it aggressively, and we just elevated it. If that makes any sense, because our option in our response, guys, is to de-escalate the inmate as long as it doesn't present an immediate threat. That's our job. So at the end of the day, is we don't want to do anything to elevate that, which could be an aggressive reaction because we're chasing after our pride, or just this person challenging my authority. I can't allow that, even though it's for something that's small, you know, because again, you're chasing after, and next thing you know, you got a code, and now you're the one that's getting in trouble now. You know, believe it or not, you're the one that's getting in trouble because again, you're putting other people at risk when it finds out that the situation that you're chasing after for is not as emergent. But Connie, what's your thoughts about that in regard to the timing of our response as opposed to the immediate reaction?
So I think one really important thing that Gary mentioned was the listening part, right? Because when you're actually listening to what it is they're saying, you're giving yourself that time to process what exactly they're after. Like, what is this even about, right? And I think that gives you the time to not be responsive, like for you to be more strategic in the way that you're going to respond, as opposed to you reacting because you're immediately getting drawn into them. So for me, I agree that you absolutely need to allow for some things to rest, right? They say some words, like, I don't think it should be a tit for tat. Like, they've said something, you kind of process that, you either respond to it or not. But like, I think that's where the self-control comes in, that you are maintaining your self-control and you are being intentional about what you respond to, not that you're jumping all over every single thing they say, because that only continues to make things escalate, right? And if along the way you've already found a solution, if you're constantly drawn into this back and forth, you don't have the time to really process that there is a solution in place and we could end this now. Right. So I agree that, you know, timing is everything. Allow for either, if in the moment you can get this de-escalated, great, do that. I think that is always what you opt for. I think in situations that are more emergent or that could create a more disastrous outcome if you don't address it, I think there's even still a way to give yourself sort of that tactical pause to make sure everything you need is in place before you continue to pursue the situation.
And that's key, guys. I mean, looking to the left or right to see what your resources are. That is a great statement there, Connie, because sometimes we get, again, so held up in our emotions that we're not looking to see where we're making ourselves vulnerable, but also other people that may have to respond. I mean, I may wind up chasing after somebody in the heat of the moment and not realize that I just put myself in the middle of a dorm surrounded by 20 of his homies. You know, it could happen. You know, I mean, a lot of the incidents that could happen in open dorms where you have to be very strategic in how you respond back to these inmates. But the last thing you want to do is start chasing them into enemy territory. I mean, I remember, I don't know if this is a similar scenario, but I remember, you know, when I was a kid, if they said, hey, if anyone ever robs you, you know, don't chase after them because you never know what you're going to run into. You know, same thing here. If I deal with this inmate who's being non-compliant and I start chasing after them, I'm so blinded by emotion that I'm just focused on him and not focused on my environment, then what's going to happen is, mind you, it's me chasing after him now. So I'm technically the aggressor, you know, without any backup. I'm going to go right into enemy territory. And now who's going to have to get me out? My peers. And I put them at risk because I'm chasing after something completely foolish. I mean, what's your thoughts on that, Gar? Chasing after, you know, an inmate on a dorm?
Well, of course, yeah. Like I said in my statement earlier, you definitely don't want to chase them and go into their territory. Look, I always tell people, whether you're civilian or custody, we want to work on our turf. We want to work on our home field, and we want to work our way. So if you think of it that way, don't ever let yourself get lured into a trap and get manipulated. That's one of Anthony's good studies there. Don't get manipulated into moving further into their territory, as Anthony said, and then end up surrounded by 20 gang members and have a lot of trouble, and then things may not come out so well for you. Work on your turf. So back on out and work on your home field with your advantage, and always make sure, civilian or custody, that you have thought ahead of time for these type of situations, and you always know where you're at and where your position and where your backup is going to come from. You got to know where that's going to come from, civilian or uniform.
Yeah, and just real quick before we come to a close, just to touch up on one more thing with the civilians. You are expected to have a level of authority, and you are expected to exercise that authority. But you're also expected to understand the limits of that authority. And what I mean by the limits of that authority is when there is an obstacle to you exercising that authority and your ability to reinforce your level of authority. See, for custody, they got a little bit more leeway when it comes to the reinforcement of authority. If their authority gets challenged, custody is the fail-safe. They're going to gain compliance. That's their job. That's what custody is there for. Now, for civilians, don't get me wrong, you still have that level of authority. So we expect, you know, again, inmates being compliant to everything that you say, or everything that you direct them to do. But the moment the inmate decides not to be compliant, that's when you start to seek the help from the fail-safe, from custody, because custody can then have the power to reinforce that compliance, because at that point, you don't know where that's going to go. You don't know if you're going to have an inmate that's going to be submissive and say, you know what, I'm going to do it. Or you don't know if the inmate's just going to turn around and just get aggressive, and you don't want to put yourself in harm's way. Custody should be equipped with the things they need to handle an inmate that's just going to continue to be non-compliant after you have tried to exert or exercise that level of authority. Now, Connie, just before we close, am I saying it right for the civilian staff? Would you agree to that, or?
So I am saying that right. I do think you're saying that right. I certainly believe that there is a limit to our authority as well as our ability to enforce anything. And there has to be a point in time where you understand that you've reached your limit, right? Like you aren't going to strong arm an inmate into doing anything they don't want to do. And quite frankly, you shouldn't have to, right? Like for most civilian employees, you guys are usually in the facilities as service providers, whatever service you provide. And with that said, the inmates need your service, right? And that's something that should remain in your mind, that the inmates need your service. And if I'm forcing this service on you, clearly you don't need or want this service, and it's okay to let them go. I understand that many programs, they have, you know, limits and expectations for how many people are involved, how many people complete the program, all that wonderful stuff. At the end of the day, if someone is refusing, that's enough justification to let them move on.
And I think actually tomorrow, me, Connie, maybe Gary, if he wants to get involved, I think that will be our topic tomorrow, is how to kind of give advice to civilians in their use of authority. I think that was a great dialogue that we crossed into that was actually unexpected, but we figured it out. Now, Gary, again, just kind of compliment what we were just discussing. What's your thoughts on the limitation of non-uniform staff authority?
Well, you know, civilians have a great place in the jail system and the prison system. We could not operate without them. But when it comes to handling a disruptive inmate, my thought has always been, we are there for the security purposes. We are there to protect everyone behind the walls. And I really, truly believe that we should be anywhere the civilian staff are working, close by, to be able to respond and help them in these type of situations. And I would hope that all civilian staff and uniform staff work together simultaneously, know what's going on. I think you mentioned it before, Anthony, or somebody did. Hey, we need to know where you're at, and then you need to know where we're at. And let's work together to protect each other so nobody gets hurt.
Oh, I'm sorry, Gary. Are you done speaking? Because I was distracted.
Yeah, you go right ahead there.
I was reading this book called The Cage Was Her Cocoon. I got distracted. Just a good book, guys, if you get a chance. And don't forget, Gary's got his books out there too. Hey guys, just real quick. Hey Gary, can you announce some of the books you have out in the market, what you have coming before we come to a close?
I have Corruption Behind Bars and Inside the Inner Circle, available on Kindle or paperback on Amazon. And one that will be out real soon, it's almost done, is The Toughest Job. And it describes everything correctional officers have to go through.
Yeah, I can't wait to read
Here
that.
are Gary's books. Can you guys see them or no?
No, because you have your green screen on and you're disappearing.
Oh man, I got Gary.
She has both your books, Gary. Look at that. She was going to show it. Look at that.
Let me see if I can take it off so that you guys can see it.
Wait a second. She went sideways. Oh, here she goes. Oh, that's what her house looks like. Wow. I didn't know that. Okay, Gary, look at this, Gary. Do you recognize these books?
Yes, Gary's books.
Oh, wow.
I am working on reading through them.
They're great books.
I'm working on it, Gary.
What's good about those books is they're individual stories. So you can kind of just, pick them up at any point, even though you do want to read it from start to finish. They're a collection of stories. Hey, Connie, anything you'd like to say in closing?
I'd like to say, if you guys don't have this book, you need to get it, because it will help you along the way to truly get through some of these very challenging situations that present themselves to you. And certainly, I want to make sure that you all know that this is worth the investment, because it is an investment in yourself.
Well, thank you, Connie. And guys, if you get a chance, The Complete Tales of Winnie the Pooh. What? No? All right, sorry. All right, guys. So I thought it was a great discussion. Again, we're going to revisit that topic a little tomorrow on the Tier Talk episode. I think that's something to explore about the authority, the limits of civilian authority, which again, I believe they have that initial power of authority, but it comes with that reinforcement of authority. I think that's going to be a great dialogue to have. Looking forward to having you check it out. But guys, in the meantime, please check out Guardian RFID stuff. They got a lot of good. Oh, wait, hold on, Gary. What do you got there, Gary?
I just want to say, everybody, here they are. You better get them. From Anthony Gangi and Connie. Here we go. I've got them also.
We got to do these shameless plugs more often. Maybe the last video for Guardian RFID. I don't know what happened today. It's Monday, guys. I don't know what happened today, but worth it. It's support and it's love. That's what it is. So guys, if you get a chance, check out Guardian RFID's channel. They have great information. We're providing content every week, but also they have other people coming on. Stephen Menard, Greg Piper, just a bunch of good people there just sharing their information and knowledge. And that's what makes us better. As always, guys, the show is on the line. Please stay safe.